Welcome back to Takacs McGinnis Elder Care Law Hour. Today, for our final episode, we are re-airing some of our favorite segments from the past 3 years.
I'm Barbara McGinnis. This next segment is from Caregiving, a Threat to the Workplace episode.
Welcome back. Jana Lisle Parham, Senior Vice President and Wealth Advisor at Lisle Parham Wealth Management. Glad to see you here. When someone has to retire early and work and give up work, that's what we're going to be talking about. So when work is disrupted due to those caregiver responsibilities, how can that affect retirement? What does that do for people, for their Social Security, their private pension plans, whatever, financially?
Well, you mentioned when someone has to retire early to become a caregiver, and I just listening to Peter in the last segment, I thought that is anything but retirement, at least the way most of us think about it. It certainly can affect things. I mean, if the person you're caregiving for is not yet retired, you possibly have two people out of the workplace now. Not, as he mentioned earlier, not every person who needs care is a retired person. Right. So you may have two people stepping out, and particularly if you're a caregiver, many are women who have stepped out earlier in their careers to have children, begin a family, and then they find themselves out of the workforce again. Things like Social Security, pensions are based so much on the number of quarters that you have worked and your highest earnings. Social Security is based on your highest 35 years of earnings, and typically for most people that happens towards the end of their career. So I think that's particularly acute for people who aren't earning above the Social Security maximum for FICA withholding, because each year that they're working, they're probably able to boost their Social Security. Pensions work similarly, so it really can be a setback for folks.
So people that do have to leave their current job, are there any wise alternatives, like an employee-sponsored or a self-sponsored retirement plan or spousal IRA contributions, something that they could do to make it easier?
Absolutely. I would say that I think, you'll hear me say again and again, prior planning is the way to hopefully anticipate unanticipated consequences. We don't really know what those unanticipated things are, but if we try to build those into the plan, hopefully we can accommodate some things going awry. Many people can contribute to a retirement plan based on their spouse's earnings. Of course, if your spouse is the one you're caregiving for, that's not going to be appropriate. Right. One thing I always remind people is, in addition to being able to contribute to a true retirement plan, be it an IRA or a simple plan or some other type of plan, to always keep in mind that savings and investing in general outside of retirement plans is still saving for retirement. It doesn't have to be in a vehicle that locks money up until a certain date. And while for tax reasons that may be preferable, when you're in a situation where you're not as certain about whether you're going to need funds in the short term, it may be good to consider that kind of savings as well.
You would think maybe that at some point people would start, like maybe if you have a parent that would pay a family caregiver, could that person then, I mean, obviously that's taxable income. That could be a IRA contribution, perhaps, or
sure. As long as there is bona fide care and you're handling it like an employee situation or 1099 situation, you're dealing with your taxes appropriately and your FICA, absolutely. And the fact is, there's a tremendous amount of care that is paid for out there. That's one of the things that I think when you're thinking about planning is to have the conversations about, what if I have 3 siblings, what would care for mom look like if it did in fact happen? And I have a number of clients who one of the children is taking care of the parent, and the other children are helping support her in a way, because they're all benefiting from her care.
Absolutely. Okay, so the scenario you mentioned a minute ago, where you have the maybe a spouse that's working, becomes ill, loses their earnings because they have to quit work, but then the caregiver spouse is like, how do you troubleshoot that? What do you do?
Well, that's a tremendous difficulty. I'll say, but I think one of the very first things that a person can do in that situation is just know that there are organizations to reach out to. Peter here talking about the podcast, I was thinking how amazing that would be as a resource for someone. The Middle Tennessee Council on Aging,
Right.
50 Forward organization, AARP, who you'll be hearing from.
Yeah.
Those are organizations that have a wealth of resources and just information that can help someone, because probably it's always the case that a caregiver is doing this for the very first time. So I
Yeah.
think that's critical. In terms of troubleshooting, again, I think the biggest thing you can do is have a plan in place that anticipates the fact that, wow, as I look around me, I know a number of people whose mom is 96, who is assisted living or in a nursing home. The chances are that something like that is going to happen, and I need to plan for that. And I will always say people need to always have a robust emergency fund. It's supposed to sit there and do nothing until you need it. And if you have elderly parents and you're seeing the possibility of having a care need, then you probably need to have more than the 3 to 6 months of living expenses.
You could maybe anticipate that. And see, I think about, we have clients, they're doing great, maybe mid-50s. One of them suddenly has an accident, and now that person can't work, and then the spouse has to leave work and take care of them.
Exactly. I mean, a long-term care situation, whether it's because of an accident or a disability or a mental cognition, those are the things that can wreck an otherwise perfect financial plan.
Okay. What about if you're having the handling the financial affairs of the person that you're caring for? How do you invest? How do you plan for that?
So if you're handling the financial affairs, you may or may not be, first of all, the actual caregiver. Much as if you would name a guardian for your child in your will, you may have a separate person to deal with the investments for their well-being. I think, first of all, it demands a plan be put in place. It may not be a long-term plan. If my mother is 90 and I have a caregiving situation, I may have a plan that is going to encompass up to 10 years, but I do need that plan in place so I can make sure that I'm accessing the resources that are there. I'm not an expert on VA benefits, but I've just heard so many times about how a widow will be able to access VA benefits because an expert has helped her resource those. That's a great example of you don't know what you don't know. And just making sure that there's a plan in place for that from both the financial end and also just the monetary end. I thought his point earlier was great about just the grind that caregiving is and the importance of staying healthy and having people to help you out.
I think what I see a lot of families that come in that situation, we spend our young adult lives accumulating and wanting our money to work for us. And it's hard to switch that mental gear to now's the rainy day you've been saving for. We're not in maybe not an accumulation phase, we're in a using phase, and it may not be wise to just continue to try to save that IRA for your kids to inherit. It may be time to use it, right?
And absolutely, and because that is a shift where you may actually be depleting an account over time, you probably do want to change the investment structure, so when we have a market downturn, that kind of thing, you can continue pulling out those necessary funds.
So maybe you're investing for safety of principle as opposed to maybe a growth strategy, or maybe have a more balanced strategy.
Exactly.
Maybe you want to access the IRA because potentially that income could be offset by a medical expense deduction, all those sorts of things.
Very, very specific, and the tax return is almost always involved in the financial calculations.
And I think probably I would say, just to toot your own horn a little bit, is that when you get into that situation, you're a caregiver or the care receiver perhaps, it's time to seek financial advice.
Hopefully you've done that long before. That's right. I mean, just like the best planning probably you all can do with as little heavy lifting is the prior planning, rather than having to step in and kind of triage a situation.
Exactly.
So you're not doing emergency planning at that point, but then maybe you're now saying is, okay, now we have to do something different. Our plan is working. Now let's see, what do we need to do now?
And asking the question about what could step in and punch this balloon that we're going off into.
All right, we asked Peter to end our segment with a tip. You got a tip or a key principle you want to leave behind?
Well, as always, it's incredibly practical, but also important, and that is simply to have a little bit of planning going on.
So Jana, we've got your contact information up.
Thank you.
We appreciate you being here again today.
We frequently get questions about caregiving. On our website, we have numerous resources under our free resources tab. Check it out. Now we've got time for one more break.